Imagine, for a moment, the very last second of the universe. Not the end of the world, not the end of humanity, not the end of the sun or the earth or even the galaxy. Something far larger than that. The end of everything. The final moment when the last star burns out, when the last particle of light stops moving, when the last flicker of energy fades into stillness. And now you ask yourself a question that sounds simple but isn't. What happens in the second after that? Stop and really think about it, because the moment you try to picture that second after, something strange happens. There is no light to see it. There is no space for it to happen in it, and there may not even be time for a second to exist at all. So where does the universe go when it ends? Does it collapse? Does it dissolve? Does it simply stop? And if it stops inside of what? We talk about the end of the universe as if it were an event, as if it was something that happens on a certain day, at a certain hour, like a candle going out. But the more carefully you look at that idea, the more it falls apart in your hands. Because an event needs time to occur. A location needs space to exist. And if the end of the universe means the end of space and the end of time themselves, then the word end may not mean what we think it means at all. This is not a religious question, and it is not only a scientific one. It sits in the exact place where the two have always quietly overlapped. And thousands of years ago, long before telescopes, long before physics, long before anyone had ever measured the expansion of the cosmos, there was a text that dared to describe what lies at the edge of creation. A text attributed to a figure who, according to tradition, was taken beyond the boundaries of the world and shown things no human being was meant to see. The Book of Enoch. And what that ancient text seems to describe about the end of all things is not what most people expect. It is stranger, quieter, and in a way that is almost impossible to explain, it echoes questions that the most advanced cosmology of our own century still cannot answer. But before we go there, before we open that door, I need you to do one small thing. If questions like this one pull at something deep inside you, if you've ever lay awake wondering what the end of everything could possibly mean, then subscribe now and turn on notifications. This channel exists for exactly this kind of journey, the ones that begin with a question and end somewhere you didn't expect. Subscribe and let's keep going, because here is where it starts to get difficult. We use the word after without ever questioning it. After lunch, after the war, after the year 2000. The word feels obvious, natural, harmless. But after is not a free word. After is borrowed. Every single time you use it, you are quietly assuming that time exists, that there is a before and a then, a sequence, a flow, a river of moments carrying one thing into the next. Now remove time from the picture. If the end of the universe is also the end of time itself, then the phrase "after the universe ends" collapses into nonsense. Not because we lack information, not because scientists haven't looked hard enough, but because the question contains a word that can no longer apply. There is no after when there is no time for after to happen in. And the same trap waits for the word where. We ask, where does the universe end? But where needs space. Where assumes there is a place, a location, a somewhere. If the boundary of creation is also the boundary of space itself, then asking where the universe ends is like asking what is north of the North Pole. The question sounds perfectly reasonable, and yet it points at nothing. There is no direction left to point. Feel how uncomfortable that is, because our minds refuse to accept it. Every time you try to imagine the edge of the universe, your imagination secretly places you just outside of it, floating in some dark, empty room, looking back at creation from the outside. But that dark, empty room is a lie your brain invents. There is no room. There is no outside. There is no observer standing beyond the edge. The edge, if there is one, is the end of the very stage on which everything happens, including you, including the darkness, including the idea of standing anywhere at all. And this, Bikis, is the strange border we are walking toward. A place where our most basic words, after, where, outside, beyond, end, begin to stop working. A place where human language itself seems to run out of ground beneath its feet. Which raises an unsettling possibility. What if the ancient texts weren't being vague by accident? What if they were vague because they were describing something that cannot be described any other way? For most of history, the Book of Enoch was almost forgotten. It was left out of the Bible that most of the Western world would come to know. It survived in fragments, in translations, in a single tradition far from Europe that quietly kept it alive for centuries. And when it finally resurfaced, people were surprised by how strange it was. Because this is not a gentle book of moral lessons, it is a book of journeys, cosmic ones. In its pages, Enoch is not a preacher. He is a traveller. He is carried upward, taken past the sky, led by beings of light through regions of the cosmos that have no names in ordinary human experience. He describes storehouses of the stars, chambers where the winds are kept, the paths the sun and moon follow, as if they were mechanisms in some vast machine. He is shown the pillars of heaven, the foundations of the earth, and places at the very ends of creation where something waits in the dark. And here is what matters. Enoch is not only interested in how the world was made, he is obsessed with something else. He is obsessed with the end. Judgment, transformation. The moment when the order of things is broken and remade. The book returns again and again to the idea that the world as we know it is temporary, that it had a beginning, that it is moving toward a conclusion, and that beyond that conclusion something entirely different begins. Not simply an ending, a turning, a threshold. Now it would be easy and lazy to jump straight to the conclusion here, to say, see, Enoch predicted modern cosmology. But that's not what we're doing, not yet. That leap is exactly the mistake most people make with texts like this one. So let's slow down and do something harder. Let's actually ask the real question first. If the universe ends, what does end even mean? Because it turns out that even modern science, armed with telescopes, equations, and a century of discovery, does not have one single answer. It has several. And they don't agree with each other. There are, broadly, three very different ways the universe might come to its end. And each one changes the meaning of the word end completely. Let's walk through all three. The first possibility is the coldest, and in many ways the most likely according to what we currently understand. The universe dies, not in fire, not in a violent collapse, but in a slow, silent fading. The scientific name for it is heat death, though heat is almost a cruel joke because it describes a universe with almost no usable heat left at all. Here is the idea. Everything that happens in the cosmos, every star that shines, every planet that forms, every thought in your head, runs on differences. Hot and cold, full and empty, dense and thin. Energy flows from where there is more to where there is less, and in that flow, things happen. Life happens. Time, in a sense, happens, but every time energy flows, the difference shrinks a little. Slowly, over unimaginable spans of time, the universe smooths itself out. the stars burn through their fuel and die. New stars stop forming because there is nothing left to form them from. The last light comes not from suns, but from the faint glow of dying embers, and then even those go dark. Black holes themselves, the last great structures in the cosmos, slowly evaporate over spans of time so long that the numbers stop meaning anything to a human mind. And what is left at the end of that road is a universe that is everywhere the same, perfectly even, perfectly still. A cold, thin, dark uniformity stretching in every direction, with no differences left anywhere to make anything happen. Now here is the unsettling part. In that final state, nothing changes. And if nothing can ever change again, if there is no flow, no event, no motion of energy from one place to another, then in what sense does time still exist? Time, as we experience it, is the measure of change, of one moment being different from the next. But if every moment is identical to the one before it forever, then there is no next. There is no tick of the clock. There is only an eternal frozen sameness. So ask yourself, is that really the end? Or is it something stranger? A universe that never technically ends at all, but simply arrives at a state where the very idea of ending no longer applies? A place where time doesn't stop with a bang, but quietly loses its meaning because there is nothing left for time to measure. That is the first door. Hold it in your mind, because there is a second possibility, and it points in a completely different direction. The second possibility does not see the end as death, it sees it as transformation. In this view, the word end is misleading. The way it would be misleading to say that water ends when it turns to steam. Nothing is destroyed. Something is changed. The universe doesn't stop existing, it becomes something we would no longer recognize. Physics offers a few versions of this. Some models suggest that the empty space between the galaxies, the vacuum we imagine as pure nothingness, may not be as stable as it looks. It may be sitting in a kind of false calm, like a ball resting in a shallow dip near the top of a hill. And if it were ever nudged out of that dip, the entire nature of reality could shift. The constants that hold atoms together, the rules that let matter exist at all, could reset into a new configuration. The universe wouldn't vanish. It would be rewritten. Other versions are gentler, stranger, almost philosophical. They suggest that as the universe expands and cools and empties out, it may eventually reach a state so smooth, so featureless, so free of any scale or landmark, that it becomes mathematically indistinguishable from the hot, dense, formless state it began in. In other words, an old, dying, empty universe and a brand new one might, at the deepest level, look exactly the same. The ending curls back around and touches the beginning. Sit with that idea for a moment, because it's genuinely dizzying. It suggests that the end and a new beginning might not be two different things. They might be the same thing seen from two sides. Destruction and creation folded into a single event. One that our language forces us to split into before and after, even though the universe itself may make no such distinction. And this brings us to the third possibility, the oldest one, the one that humanity has imagined again and again in 100 different cultures, long before any of us knew what a galaxy was. The universe is reborn, not once, not in a straight line from beginning to end, but in a cycle: birth, growth, death, and then birth again. A cosmos that breathes, that expands and contracts, or burns out and reignites, or collapses and rebounds, over and over, in a rhythm without any final stopping point. Some serious cosmological models take this idea seriously. Universes that bounce, universes that collide and restart, universes that shed their old form and begin a new cycle from the ashes of the last. And here I have to be very careful, because this is exactly where it becomes tempting to cheat. I am not going to tell you that ancient texts proved the universe is cyclical. They didn't. What I want you to notice is something quieter and honestly more interesting. Why does this idea keep appearing? Why did so many human traditions separated by oceans and centuries independently imagine creation, destruction, and renewal as a single, unbroken wheel? Ancient cosmologies across the world spoke of ages that end and ages that begin again, of worlds destroyed and worlds remade, of time not as a line but as a circle. Were they all simply guessing, or were they reaching with the only words they had toward a shape that the mathematics of our own century keeps rediscovering? I don't know, and I want to be honest with you about that. But if you're feeling that pull right now, that itch at the back of the mind that says there's a pattern here, then do something for me. Drop a comment below and tell me which of the three you believe. Does the universe die? Does it transform? Or does it come back around? I read these, and the answers people give say something remarkable about how we each secretly picture eternity. And if this journey is holding you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this kind of question reach the people who lie awake thinking about it too. Now, let's leave philosophy behind for a moment and look at what we can actually see. Because the sky is not silent, it is full of clues. And some of them are genuinely strange. Start with the most fundamental fact we know about the cosmos. It is expanding, every distant galaxy is rushing away from every other, and the space between them is stretching. Wind that backward, and you arrive at a beginning, a single, dense, blazing origin point, but wind it forward, and you arrive at a question. Does it expand forever? Does it slow down and reverse? Or does something else take over? And here is where the strangeness begins. Because a few decades ago we discovered that the expansion is not slowing down the way gravity should demand. It is speeding up. Something is pushing the universe apart faster and faster, and we don't know what it is. We gave it a name, dark energies, but the name is a confession, not an explanation. It is the label we put on a force we can measure but cannot understand. And it makes up most of the universe. And dark energy points toward a specific kind of ending. If it keeps pushing, the galaxies will eventually be flung so far apart that, from any point in the cosmos, the rest of the universe simply disappears over the horizon. The night sky goes dark. Every island of light drifts alone into an ever-growing emptiness. It is an ending not by fire, and not by collapse, but by isolation. By distance becoming infinite. But dark energy is not the only strange thing out there. Our own galaxy, along with everything near it, is being pulled. Not scattered randomly, pulled in a particular direction toward a region so massive and so hidden that we call it the Great Attractor. We cannot see it clearly because it lies behind the crowded heart of our own galaxy. We only know it by its grip. Something vast is out there, and we are falling toward it along with thousands of other galaxies, like water circling a drain we cannot see. And there's more. When we map the faint afterglow of the universe's birth, the ancient radiation left over from its first moments, we find patterns that shouldn't quite be there. Cold spots larger than they should be. Alignments in the largest structures of the cosmos that seem, unsettlingly, to point in a preferred direction, as though the universe has an axis, a top and a bottom, when it should have none at all. Each phenomenon whispers the same question in a different voice. Where is all of this going? What is pulling us, pushing us, shaping us? And is the fate of the universe something gentle and slow, or something with a structure, a direction, a design we haven't grasped? But here is where I have to stop myself, because there is a problem. And if I don't say it out loud, I'd be doing exactly what I promised not to do. A resemblance is not a proof. It is one thing to notice that an ancient text speaks of ends and thresholds and worlds beyond worlds. It is another thing entirely to claim that the text was describing dark energy, or the Great Attractor, or the fate of the cosmos. Those are not the same, and the human mind is a pattern-finding machine, dangerously good at seeing faces in clouds and meaning in coincidence. We have to be honest about the difference between four things that are easy to blur together. There is evidence, something measured, tested, repeatable. There is coincidence, two things that resemble each other by pure chance. There is interpretation, the meaning we choose to lay on top of an old text. And there is speculation, the story we build in the gaps. When Enoch describes the ends of the earth and the storehouses beyond, that is not evidence of cosmology. It is imagery. Ancient, powerful imagery. To pretend otherwise would be to lie to you. So let me ask the honest question. If it isn't proof, then why does the connection refuse to let go of us? Why does it still feel like something? And I think the answer is the most interesting part of this entire story. Because it forces us to realize that we've been asking the wrong question from the very beginning. We started by asking, how will the universe die? Cold death, transformation, or rebirth? But every one of those answers quietly assumes the same thing. That ending is an event, something that happens. A thing the universe does at a certain point within time and within space. Now turn the question inside out. If the universe ends, what exactly is ending? The matter? The stars and atoms and dust? Perhaps. But matter is only the furniture. The deeper question is about the room itself, because if the end of the universe is truly the end of space and the end of time, then what ends is not a thing inside the cosmos. What ends is the very stage on which all things and all events occur. The container, the context, the inside itself. And that changes everything, because an event happens inside the universe. But the end of the universe cannot be an event inside the universe. There would be no inside left for it to happen in. It would be the moment the concept of inside the universe stops making sense. Not a thing that occurs in time, but the closing of time. Not a place where creation stops, but the vanishing of the very idea of place. This is a kind of ending our minds are simply not built to hold. We can picture a star exploding. We cannot picture the end of the frame that all pictures require. And so we do what humans have always done when the truth exceeds the language. We reach for images, thresholds, doors, storehouses at the end of the world, regions beyond the paths of the sun and moon, places where the winds are kept and the foundations end. And suddenly the ancient text looks different, not because Enoch was doing physics, but because Enoch was doing the one thing we still cannot do, describing the edge of everything using the only tool any of us has ever had, metaphor, the attempt to point at something for which no literal word exists. What if the old language wasn't primitive? What if it was reaching, clumsily, poetically, desperately, toward the exact place where our modern language also runs out? Two travelers, thousands of years apart, arriving at the same cliff. and finding that neither science nor scripture has a map for what lies past the edge. Look at the shape it makes. Before creation, the unimaginable state where nothing yet existed, where there was no before for there to be a before in. Then creation, the beginning of space, of time, of everything. Then the end of creation, the closing of that same space and time. And then the question that has haunted every human who ever looked up at the stars. What exists beyond the end? It is a mirror. The question of what came before the beginning and the question of what comes after the end are the same question reflected. Both stand at a place where time itself does not reach. Both ask us to imagine an outside to a thing that may have no outside at all. And both leave us standing exactly where Enoch stood, according to the ancient story, at the edge of creation, looking out into something we have no word for. So I'll leave you where every honest version of this journey has to end, not with an answer, with the question made sharper. If time itself comes to an end, can there be an after at all? And if there cannot, if after quietly dissolves the moment the last clock stops, then perhaps the end of the universe is not an ending in any sense we've ever meant by that word. Perhaps it is something else entirely, something for which no human being, ancient or modern, has yet found the name. That's what I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, do you believe there is something beyond the end of the universe? Or does the very idea of beyond disappear along with time itself? I read every one of these, and the answers are extraordinary. If this took you somewhere you didn't expect, leave a like. It's a small thing, but it carries these questions further than you'd think. And this journey isn't finished. There's another one waiting for you right now, appearing on the screen, because the story of what lies at the edge of creation has more doors than this one. Click it and let's step through the next threshold together, because some questions don't end. They only open